Ďakujem pekne. Tak oplatí sa otestovať, že kade vám oči behajú tu na stánku. A myslím si, že je to celkom dobrá metóda a užitočná. Prinesie ešte do toho poznania samotného spotrebiteľa veľa otvorí tých myšlienok a veľa neznámeho objasní. No, poďme ďalej. Druhou prezentáciou bude sprevádzať taký výraz, volá sa, že blockchain. Výraz blockchain, keď nastúpil, tak súvisel možno, že na začiatku s tými kryptomenami, súvisel s tým, že to bol taký pojem bezpečnosti, bol to pojem dôveryhodnosti, istoty, kedy vznikala reťaz za sebou, ktorá sa už spätne meniť nedala. Tento pojem sa však dostal aj do retailu, a tak som sám zvedavý, ako sa s ním spojil a ako nám ho dokáže ďalší prezentujúci objasniť. Takže v tejto chvíli je už ready pán Gerrie Smits, je inovačným stratégom a má slovo. It's your turn, please.
Cool. On stage again. Thanks for having me. It's been the first time in pretty much 2 years to come out of the house again. Thanks very much for having me. I want to start with something this. I want you to give yourself some applause. Good? You like yourself. No, I mean it, because I arrived here yesterday and I saw this and I thought, bloody hell, that's cool. Is anyone going to show up to come and sit in a dark room where the weather is nice to listen to a talk about blockchain? The competition was fierce. So thank you very much for coming here. I also did a little neuromarketing trick now, because I made you start with applause. So you already feel good about what I'm going to do now. So blockchain. I'm extremely intrigued by blockchain. The first time I heard about the whole thing, I didn't sleep for 2 days. And let me start you with a few stories to give you an idea of where I come from. So I used to live in London. I live in Belgium, another small country. But I used to live in London for a long time. And then when I moved back to Belgium, I kind of felt a little bit like this. I had to jump through all this kind of administrative bullshit in order to move and, social security numbers. And it's terrible. And then a few months later, I moved some money from my British account into my Belgian account. And then I felt a little bit like this, because I lost a whole lot of money on the way. Exchange fees, percentages, etc. I thought, that's a bit strange. And another thing what kind of enlightened my mind was about 2 years ago. There was this sort of culture change in the air when the Business Roundtable, a bunch of CEOs from American companies, big American companies, made a statement and said we should look at what the purpose of a company is, and should we actually change it rather than move towards the hyper-capitalist, make money for shareholders. Should we look at actually supplying value for stakeholders more? And I think those things, sort of insufficient data usage, very powerful middlemen like banks, and sort of this tendency in the last few years to look at the other side of business are reasons why I think blockchain is worth thinking about. So here's my statement for today. They've asked me to talk about blockchain and retail. And my point is, blockchain is retail. There's a big chance it's totally useless. But there's also a small chance that if blockchain succeeds and promises or delivers what it promises to do, then it will totally change the way we kind of do commerce and exchange value. The chances are small, but the impact could be huge. And that's what I want to talk about today. Who am I? I think my introduction, I heard innovation strategist or something like that, so that's kind of what I do. I'm a freelancer. I call myself the CCO of myself. CCO stands for Chief Curiosity Officer. I'm just extremely curious. Myself, I'm independent. I help companies and governments deal with the impact of digital in the broadest sense of the word. And words I use too often, because I'm not a techie. I'm totally not technical. I'm actually someone who really looks at the user impact, design thinking kind of thing. It's sort of my red thread throughout my career. I've worked in government, I've worked in marketing, etc., etc. That's one word I use too often, that user-centric. And two, the word I use too often is blockchain. Actually, as I said, it kept me awake for 2 days after I started understanding this whole thing. And there was so much shit being written about blockchain that I wrote a book myself about it, trying to explain it in slightly more simple terms. It's not in Slovakian, it's not even in English, but believe me, it's really good apparently. But it's called Blockchain is WTF, which stands for, like, if you translate it out of Dutch, quite possibly totally fundamental. So it's that paradox between maybe it's shit, maybe it will change the world. What will we do today? Nicely color-coded, 4 things. I'll briefly explain what blockchain is, just in case you haven't really understood it yet. Very simple, not technical. And then I'll talk about 3 levels of what I think is where the impact of blockchain could be most felt in retail/commerce. And the most exciting bit, I'll get more excited as we go along. The red bit is where I think the theme of this conference, humanity meets technology, technology meets humanity. I'll drag the technology back into the humanity side of things, because I think that's where it's really interesting. So if blockchain is W2F, what the F is blockchain actually? In the beginning I started saying something like, well, it's kind of like a software, database software that's decentral. It means it runs on a different bunch of computers rather than one. And what the software does, it validates transaction. You send something to something else, and the computers say, yes, it's valid, and 2, at the end of the day, they sort of change the score. You owe X more, and the other one owes X less. And at any given point, all the computers know what the status is, who owns what. It's kind of correct, but it's boring. So I've learned to explain blockchain slightly different by doing a role play. So we are going to role play blockchain, and you will never forget how blockchain works. I'm going to do a transaction. The lady here in the front just looks away already, but you're going to be my main role play, but everybody has to take part. No beeping, yeah. I'm going to do a role play. I'm going to do a transaction of something of value, an orange. What's your name? Barbara. We can understand, we can hear that. So I'm going to do a transaction of something of value. Everybody pays attention because you're all part of the role play. Okay? That's it. Thanks for receiving the orange. We've just played blockchain. Why? Because if I ask you, who's now the owner of the orange, you go, there you go, you just play blockchain. It's basically what it is. Just imagine that you're a computer in a decentralized network. Decentralized because you kind of don't know each other and you didn't agree to all go Barbara together. Instead, you used software, or you've used some tools to, 1, register the transaction, your eyes in this case, store it, and you'll use your brain, and you've actually also used your mouth to sort of signal it back to everybody, yes, we all agree that now the orange is Barbara's. That's basically what blockchain does. You know, I always compare it, it's consensus. Yes, that transaction happened, but then a software. Or we can dive into the technical details of cryptographics and chains and whatever. Fact of the matter is, it's not important, and 2, it changes all the time because there's more and more blockchains coming up with different technical ways. But to do exactly that is define, create a shared history of what we have seen as, yes, it happened. Basically, that's it. No more tech stuff, that's all. I can kind of explain it. But as I said, it's not important, especially not when you talk about the potential impact of a technology. Let the techies do the techie stuff. Let us look at the potential impact, because that's way more interesting. So let's start on one level. As I said, I'm going to discover 3 levels. And the natural level to start with is money, 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 money. You know, we all know blockchain as the money machine. You should know a lot about it, because it was apparently in Slovakia that the first Bitcoin ATM machine was installed in Bratislava. So well done to you. Who owns Bitcoin here? Oh, okay, fair amount, yeah. We're not going to talk too much about Bitcoin. I don't care what you think about Bitcoin. But blockchain was kind of invented to make Bitcoin possible. Because Bitcoin was this thing where you needed a shared history of, yes, that transaction happened without having to rely on a bank. And that's important, that concept. Rumor has it that this was the first transaction ever on a blockchain. By the looks of it, there's a few technical people in the room. Sorry to be stereotypical, but these guys code at 3 in the morning or late at night, and then they're hungry, and then they call for a pizza. And this is apparently what happened in 2010, I think it was. 2 programmers on the Bitcoin protocol said, hey, we're hungry. Can someone send us 2 pizzas? We'll give you 10,000 Bitcoins in return. Apart from the fact that those were very expensive pizzas, the fact that they could do that transaction immediately without having to rely on something means that blockchain is this way to make sure that there is a guaranteed settlement of money, right? If you look at it that way, it becomes a bit more clear. So the natural question, so should we from the retail or a commerce point of view doing business accept Bitcoin? Yesterday, Walmart, one of the bigger supermarkets in the States, said they will accept Litecoin, one of these Bitcoin spin-offs. They will accept it from October. I have no idea why. Should we accept Bitcoin? I'm really not sure. Because the fact of the matter is that people who have Bitcoin generally don't want to use it to spend. They generally think it's going to go up to the moon and they want to hold on to it. So accepting Bitcoin as a commerce, I don't know. Someone once bought a book of mine. Can you do that with this thing? Yeah. For 26 euros back in the days with Bitcoin. He said, I insist, I want to pay with Bitcoin. Do you accept Bitcoin? I said, yeah, sure, I'll accept Bitcoin. It's now worth 300 euros. So I got better out of it. But you might as well pay it in euros, you know. So I think for commerces and businesses and retail, I don't think the use case is hugely, hugely interesting to start accepting Bitcoin. Unless you have an adventurous chief financial officer who wants to have Bitcoin on the balance books. But I'm not sure. There are people that say, well, but then we should have stable coins. You should be able to pay with stable coins. Stable coins are basically cryptocurrencies that are always worth $1. Either through sort of reserves that back it up or by algorithmic weirdness, whatever. So, hey, you could actually implement this on your website. You could start accepting USDC and DAI today. It's possible, but again, there's alternatives for that. People who are in crypto and want to pay you, they have credit cards for that. You know, the credit card system like Visa and MasterCard are open enough to let people prepay their credit card with crypto, swap it to euros, and you can go to your local Walmart or your local supermarket or Aldi here. So again, I'm just thinking, I think the future of retail/commerce and blockchain is not so much into let's say, accepting crypto. I think the WTF level, the what the level, is pretty low there. Unless, and this is one particular use case that I want to point out, is that you're in the business of selling something that the powers that be may not like. Stripe, one of those American process payment companies, they actually have a list of restricted businesses. And they say, if you're that kind of business, we can block you. That kind of business is a vague term. If we're into child pornography, we tend to agree that's probably not acceptable. If we're in sort of marijuana paraphernalia, it gets a bit more vague. And I think a country like yours with a quite intense history knows that sometimes the goalposts move quite quickly. So if you're in a business that, like OnlyFans, who all of a sudden got blocked by MasterCard and Visa for accepting or processing payments because they defined it as not suitable material, i.e. pornographic material, then stable coins or cryptocurrencies might be interesting. But it's a small market. Second level, where I think, hey, as a commercial business, where's blockchain? Apart from blockchain being like a money settlement machine, you could also look at blockchains as an optimization machine. And I'll give you 2 kind of use cases of that to see where optimization, particularly around processes, can help businesses. And for that, I just want to drag you out of the technology even more and want to point, I think I've picked 6. 6 kind of like building blocks, parameters, unique selling propositions, things that blockchain is special in, I think. And one of them is that idea of traceability, which we've role-played before. Barbara has that orange, and we can always trace that. Although software can trace that. You'll forget it by tomorrow, but the software is pretty good at always keeping track of who's owner of the orange. And that concept of traceability, rather than just apply it to money or to oranges, you can also apply it to anything, really, to data points. So what you'll see in the retail sector is this idea of creating provenance, creating a track record of what happened to the product in order to prove that your coffee is sustainable, your t-shirt is biological fair trade, your salad hasn't been dealt with pesticides. So big companies like IBM, they set up their own blockchain network and they say, let's work with the food industries like big supermarkets to actually make sure that we can kind of trace the provenance, the history, the origin of our food products. You've done it as well. I checked. Chocolate on the blockchain? In Slovakia, you do it. Same thing. Let's find a way to prove to the customer, to the consumer, where our chocolate ingredients, our cocoa beans and whatever come from. This apparently sells more. I don't know what our Jacob from the neuromarketing thing thinks about it, but Carrefour, the big French supermarket chain, did tests. They've been doing tests for years, where they actually have labels where you could scan and you have a bit of information about the origin of the product. People read it sometimes for up to a minute and a half. Don't know who those people are, but apparently they do. But the idea is that chicken on the blockchain sells better than chicken not on the blockchain. So from their point of view, I never thought I would say a sentence like that. But it works, apparently. So from a consumer point of view, optimizing these processes and proving the accountability or the transparency of a product seems to have an investment or a return on investment. The second element in this idea of blockchain is optimization is the idea of what the industry calls smart contracts. It's just a technical term for immutable business logic. What some blockchains do is they give people the chance in a programming language to write code, to write basically if this then that statements, and store it in the immutable blockchain, which means that it will always execute immutably what it's programmed to do. It's basically apps that are sensor resistant, that kind of stuff. If you look at it from a business point of view, hey, we can create business logic that just works automatically. You see optimization opportunities. It's basically, to make it even simpler, I guess, is if Barbara were to be 18 years, because she's very young and she's not, then she would get the orange. We could program that into a bit of code, deploy that code on a blockchain, and it will execute that. At that point when she's 18, she will receive the orange. It's that idea. A couple of silly examples, which I once invented to explain that concept, is insurance, car insurance. You know, we won't have just flying cars, but they'll all be connected, and they'll be connected to a blockchain at some point. And they will actually say, if you haven't paid, it won't start. If, then absolutely that. If you've been driving really well, then absolutely your premium will change automatically. And that's the big change in this, because we can trust the code, if it's bug-free, to execute what it was programmed to do. If your flight is delayed by 1 hour, and we have trusted data to feed into the app, then you will get a payout if you bought insurance for flight delay. AXA's been doing that kind of stuff. So the promise of these kind of blockchains, which have nothing to do with Bitcoin, this is companies setting up their own blockchain networks. But the promise is optimization. You could say that this is a very, very simple way of creating like a value chain. The way businesses create value, there's a lot of companies in between before the end service or the end product comes to the consumer. What blockchain promises to do is this. It says we don't need a bunch of those companies or teams or service providers in between, especially when it comes to auditing, putting the same data in again and sending it on, that kind of stuff. You don't need blockchains for that, but it's bloody easy sometimes. So that's a bit of the promise of this optimization thing. Couple of things, couple of examples to make it real, especially for retail and commerce, is trade finance. Especially for smaller companies, it's quite difficult sometimes to get advances on invoices, especially if you're dealing cross-European companies. Because you don't trust each other, you don't know each other, and your bank doesn't trust the Italian bank to sort of how do we deal with that. So a bunch of banks set up a conglomerate to make on a blockchain to make sure that they all trust each other and actually make sure that it's kind of like pre-banking statements or pre-bank payment guarantees. So they can actually they say more trusts, more trade. So they pre-finance easier or quicker to small SMEs, small and medium enterprises, because they know that they're going to get all the money because everybody agrees to the same principles. And this is something I think is really interesting. In China, they're experimenting with putting their currency on a blockchain. It's not just for efficiency, but it's also to add conditions to it. If you have a currency on the blockchain, you could add the condition, if not used within 2 months, then expire. If supplied to shop that doesn't agree with this, can't use. So the city of Antwerp, where I come from, they had these experiments where they gave their staff, of the 10,000 civil servants or something, they gave them a bonus, not in euro, in U-coins, which they could only spend with participating local suppliers in order to stimulate the local economy. You'll see more and more of that happening, that local economies are crucial in our global economy sphere, and this kind of blockchain-based money with conditions could potentially help spur smaller entrepreneurs and retail businesses. What are the benefits of this level for retail and commerce? Basically, sometimes they call blockchain a trust machine. It was once on the cover of one of the big business magazines, the trust machine. It sounds good, but it's basically you can, using blockchains in these kind of optimization ways, you can reduce the cost of trust. You don't have to rely on all the expensive audits in principle to make sure that the contract is executed, the money is sent, the stamping documents are done, and those kind of things. And the second thing is, is you improve your accountability, the traceability. Yes, you have a ledger, you have a database somewhere that's open or checkable by the people who have access to prove that X, Y, Z is done. So the promise there is, will companies at some point, or governments, but we're talking more about business here, will we as consumers buy from companies that use blockchains in the back end? Because it makes it cheaper, faster, and also possibly more transparent. If the trend to ethical buying at some point rises because of all the ecological pressures that we have, then this may be interesting for you. So I've judged it on medium. Yes, it's interesting. Yes, businesses can sort of shave off their costs, increase their margins. Yes, there is some transparency there that might benefit the end user, but it's boring. Optimization, I think, is boring. Blockchain wasn't invented to optimize some business processes. Blockchain was invented for Bitcoin to give the world a kick up the ass and to challenge it to look at things differently. We can disagree with that, we can agree with that. That's not the point. I'm not making judgment here. But I think the real challenge for us as non-techies and business people is to look at the real threatening or opportunities that blockchain could potentially do. And that was what we call Web3 thinking. I just picked the start of what Andrew Reed, I think it was, talked about in the future, or what was it about the internet doesn't work and the future is bleak and all that. And he said Web 2, social media, etc., failed us. because we got big monopolies. I used to be a huge believer in social media because of the democratization of information, etc., etc. But the same thing, I feel slightly disappointed. Now I'm excited about this. I may be disappointed again in 10 years' time, but I think we have a bit more chance to change. Let's put it this way. With blockchain as optimization, we're not going to make a better world. And if we agree that the world is not that great or has the potential to really be not that great in 20, 30 years' time, then this might be a lens through which to look at the problem. If you strip down blockchains to what they're really good at, is this. It's enabling parties, people, machines, businesses, whatever, to exchange value, whatever that is, money, data, oranges, without having to trust a third party. That's sort of the simplest, purest idea of what blockchains are good at. And if you use that, then it becomes more interesting. So what I want to do is I want to give you an overview of what these Web3 people, and they're all younger than you, are all also very male, I must say, but this Web3 world, they think differently about things. They didn't grow up in a world where Web2 was that prominent. I mean, I'm old. I'm granddad in that world. Sometimes I hang around in that world. These are all 20-somethings trying to change the world for a better place. And I want to give you an insight in how they think, deliver a few concepts, and then see where we could go with that when it comes to retail and commerce. These guys say, we've got blockchains and all this Web3 technology. Why the hell do we need banks? They're not necessarily attacking them, but they're challenging their added value. Same with Amazon, same with Facebook, all the monopolies, all the institutions, so to speak. You can be pro or against it, but it's worth a thought. So the first, again, I'll do four building blocks, 4 USPs, which I think make blockchain interesting. And the one is the idea of unique digital assets, which basically means that you can have scarcity, but again, guaranteed. You know, the whole thing of traceability and security says once it's transacted, it's done. Once something is deployed, a contract, it's deployed. It won't change anymore. So the idea that you can actually create a digital token, we call it, that can be programmed to be not copyable and unique. That's an interesting element. You don't need blockchains for that. You can do it with normal technology. But blockchains have a better guarantee level that it's real. The last few months, there's been a lot of talk about NFTs, which is basically the technical term for this unique digital assets, which stands for non-fungible token. Non-fungible means that it's unique. It can't be just changed for another. It's not like a 20 euro bill can be changed for another 20 euro bill. That's a fungible token. These are non-fungible, unique. So the big story was, hey, someone sold a digital piece of art for $69 million. A JPEG. But it was done at Christie's. So Christie's, the big auctioning house, says, we believe in this kind of world. We want to experiment with it. Someone paid an enormously silly price. But the concept is, you can always prove that this is unique, that you are the owner, and that it can't be copied. You can take a screen grab from it, but that's not exactly the same, right? That's the idea. The thing is, these young kids, I call them, the millennials, Generation Z, even you, I've got a 10-year-old. She's going to get there as well. They look at things slightly differently. This was a tweet from one of these guys. He plays a game called Axie Infinity, which is a blockchain-based game. And as in many games, you can kind of win characters or unique, rare creatures, etc. The difference with blockchain-based games is you truly own it. You are the owner. Crazy times, big market prices, you could also decide to sell it. So this little thing here, I don't know which one it was, I think this one here, this thing, pixels, was worth $150,000 at some point. And he says, are you crazy? I'm not gonna sell it because it's rare and it's mine. We all love something special, right? So you see there's a lot happening in gaming. What does the fashion industry do? You know, always a retail industry that's slightly ahead of the game. All right, let's do that. So they've been experimenting with this format of unique digital tokens that represent something. Virtual sneakers, a company put them online, they sold 3 million worth of sneakers in a couple of minutes. I see you laughing. Oh, that's funnier stuff coming. But yeah, when we start laughing, those guys, that's when you need to take it seriously. Because that's when the young kids go, but what are you laughing at? There are digital items, and we're talking about basically digital retail or selling of digital items. Fashion industry is selling some digital items, digital versions of what they make for real life for more money than the physical version. There's a shift happening. You'll hear a lot the next few months about the metaverse, basically virtual reality, virtual goods, etc., etc. It's really heavily related to what blockchain could do. Gaming, fashion, but also something like interior design. There's an artist, he created digital tables that you could never make physically, sold them online. That one was sold for $67,000. Why? Because you own it, you can port it to other platforms, so he could actually use it in something like Minecraft and show off, come and sit at my table, right? So there's this whole new format of virtual world that is pushed by blockchain to actually make sure that you have proof and have ownership of a digital asset. And I think that's something that the commerce and retail world, well, they're going crazy about it. We have no idea what they're all going to come up with, but it's a strong principle. Similar, when Lionel Messi signed for Paris Saint-Germain recently, shock, shock, shock. Apparently part of his contract was paid out in PSG tokens, which is basically the fan token from Paris Saint-Germain, the football club, to reward people that people can buy to get special access to. And apparently it's true that part of his contract was paid out in basically a fan token. And again, think about these young kids that are growing up with digital assets. They don't necessarily want a jersey with Messi's name on it. They'll want a fan token that maybe he owns. It's a shift in what could be actually sold. So that's one element of this Web3 way of thinking, uniqueness. The second one is quite related to what I think Andrew was just referring to, the whole issue of privacy. What blockchain and Web3 is thinking about is more control. Andrew was just talking about agency, control over your own situation. And in blockchain, that can be done around data. More than control, you could actually look at how you monetize things. A couple of ideas. This is an app, this is not a blockchain app. This is Cake. Cake is an app in Belgium that's recently launched and actually rewards people for spending. Not cashback, but basically, hey, if you do action X, Y, and Z, every month you get a little bit of money back. €2 or something like that. In return for what? Access to your financial data. Now, compared to Facebook, that's already good. At least they're getting something. But €2 per month for getting access to my financial data? Fuck off. Not me. The Web3 world says the same thing, like, wow, hold on, we actually have apps in place in the next coming years where you have total control over what happens with your data. Not sort of in a shield of haziness and a cloud of intransparency, if that's a word. What happens with my data? How long can you have it? Who has it? What are you making out of the transaction? So the Web3 world is more looking at applications that give you back agency and control over your identity, who sees what data, and in the future, we're not there yet, how to monetize that. Really, with all the levels of traceability, transparency, if that's necessary, built in. So that's really a big, interesting issue of data control. And that's on an individual level. The interesting thing is where Web 2 or the corporate world is merging with Web 3 thinking. And this is a really interesting concept of when you own, there's always been that discussion the last 10 years of data is the new oil. It's bullshit. Data is not the new oil. Until now. Because you can never been able to really monetize your data, really. Because it's expensive to transfer data from a data lake to another data lake. There's huge privacy issues. There's, every time you copy data, everyone goes, oh, I hope there's not a leak again. So it doesn't happen that much. Now, the real value in data, the real gold in data is in data sharing. And through this kind of Web3 thinking, where you have control over your data, control over who accesses it, and control over how you can monetize it, because you can all put it in if this, then that smart contracts, you see corporates being more and more open to sharing data with other companies that they would never share data with. Imagine Ford and Renault, 2 car brands. They all want self-driving cars. They just don't have the data to train their algorithms to make it safe. So what's happening with these guys, never mind, and I must say they're a client of mine, full disclosure, but I like them. So what's happening is that Ford, Renault, Toyota can actually start sharing all their data without having to share the actual data. So what they can do is they can say, hey, Renault, we are Ford, we have interesting data. Do you want your algorithm to have access to our data? Then this is the price. You can't see the data, but you can take the learnings with you because they're not competitive. That's your competitive advantage. So it's with these kind of Web3 ways of thinking and these kind of tools that they're building that we're seeing new ways to think about data ownership, data control, data monetization, if that's important, on an individual level, but also on a corporate level. And that's where it gets really interesting, of course, from a business and commerce point of view. A lot of businesses will be sitting on lots of consumer data, which they can never sell because of privacy reasons, but you can now find ways to match them with other data sets from an insurer and maybe start doing other kinds of products, whatever that is. That's innovation thinking with the Web3 angle in it. Third one, that whole concept. We don't have to rely on third parties if there are more decentralized or blockchain-based or Web3 alternatives. Call it peer-to-peer, but it's a broad concept. You see it a lot in the music industry now. Music industry was one of the commerces first disrupted by the internet with Napster and all that. Music industry still exists. But there's still that idea of make it more democratic. So what Web3 companies are doing, so let's put it this way, the old record companies were afraid of Napster. That was illegal. Then there was Spotify, which they co-own, so that's not that threatening. They're making money out of that. So now there's things like audios, and the Web3 world says, hold on, if I make a song and someone wants to stream it or pay it, that transaction is between these two parties. Why does the middleman take 90% of the cut if they're not providing 90% of the value? So it's these kind of friction points that the Web3 is trying to fix with something like audios, and there's many others around where, hey, we can make transactions more direct, just like I did with Barbara, and you were the witnesses. There's a system, you can build systems that witness the transaction. If I create a song, I own it, and you can use it to stream or to use it in a commercial under these and these and these conditions. It's theory, we're not there yet. But again, my premise of the day was, if they make these things work, we have a different kind of way of doing business and exchanging value. And we should know about it. Peer-to-peer electricity, sure, happens. But if we do it on a blockchain, Lithion, a German company, can do it 20% cheaper. Again, optimization with a Web3 angle, bam. That's real. I once met the guy, the CEO, 31 years old CEO of a real energy company, providing Web3 thinking to electricity delivery. We can make it cheaper. I actually own a house, or 0.1% of a house in Detroit, because of this way of doing commerce. Blockchain thinking or Web3 thinking real estate companies, what they do is they tokenize their house in 1,000 tokens, and you can buy it. It's like buying a small share in a house. So far, so boring. But what's programmed into the token is a constant stream of revenue from rent. Automatic. This is all legal. But there's also a secondary market for it. So if I want to sell my 0.1% of the house, I might just automatically find the buyer. And once it's changed owner, and the system has witnessed it, it's not mine anymore. Different ways of finding business models, different ways of combining automation, optimization with new value creation. And there's actually, and I only discovered this recently, companies like Boson, their ambition is to completely be the Amazon of peer-to-peer marketplaces. That's hugely ambitious. And they say so. What we're trying to do is going to be difficult because of regulatory issues, technical issues, possible hacks, etc., etc. But I'm just pointing this out, is that these ambitions are there. These are people that believe in this idea of why do we need to pay X amount of money for our institutions? Because the value that they're delivering, we could do that cheaper, better, more transparent, and more fair. Will they succeed? I'm not sure. Don't buy the token. But they're working on it. And if these guys make a dent in an industry that's billions worth, then they're going to be important. And money is not an issue in that world. They have enough money because they're in crypto. Yeah? I'll skip this one. And I want to end with, I think, my favorite USP, unique selling proposition of what blockchain is really, is the idea that you can use all these tools and these programming tools and the smart contracts and the digital tokens to create new ways of creating value together. You know the cooperative business model, where as a group of people you own a bank or a factory. It's been used for centuries. But it's always hard to scale, and blockchain has the potential to scale that. And this relates, in the beginning I was talking about why I find blockchain so interesting, about the business roundtable, 180 CEOs in America that said, we should look at capitalism differently. It's because of that. It's because of this. Currently, most companies kind of work that way. A lot of value is created at the bottom, and it gets pushed to the top. And the people at the top benefit from it more. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but you see more and more signs that that's not sustainable, that from an economic point of view, it's not sustainable. So what these Web3 thinkers want to explore, and what they believe is, it's more like network economies, where all stakeholders in a process or a product or a company, they add value, they get something roughly relative out of it. Whether you're a supplier for your t-shirts or your coffee or your Slovakian chocolate on the blockchain, whether you're an investor, whether you're an employee, etc., etc. Now that's theory, and it's super hard, but it's exactly why I think blockchain might be very impactful. If they can make this work, then we will literally have new types of organizations and companies. When audience is for the record company, as in I buy a song from you and we transact directly, Royal is that for investors. I can raise funds. What we used to do before was crowdfunding. Hey, do you want to help me make a CD? And then you kind of pre-buy a CD. What these guys are doing, do you want to help me make an album? and you own the rights to the album, co-own, because it's traceable. There's no legal shit in between. You could start programming that in. It's super, super interesting. I was talking to Mark this morning. I was on the same flight as him. He talked about this morning about growing meat out of cells, basically synthetic meat. And talking about the funding of that research, how it's often in the early stages of research, it's really hard to get money because the risk is too high, the legal costs are too high. So what's happened a couple of weeks ago is that a company called VitaDAO, well, it's not a company, it's an organization. They acquired the intellectual property of a medical research center in Denmark that is doing research for longevity, like how to live 500 years long. And that's underfunded, because who wants to take a punt? Who wants to make a gamble on longevity research? So what they did is they bought it and then again split it again over people who contributed to the fund. It's basically VC funds, but then for intellectual property or medical research on a blockchain. So it's always traceable. There's no arguments about who owns what. These things are happening. If they should have done that in a non-blockchain world, it would have cost triple the amount of money. New ways of sharing value. Web 2 companies keep all the value. Facebook. In between companies like that cake app from Belgium, they give a little bit back. Whether that's a bad thing or not, or whether that's criminal or not is another thing. But Web 3 companies, they say, well, everything's automated, everything's optimized. We're giving more back. So again, the Axie Infinity game, which gives you rewards for playing. Rather than having to pay to play, you actually earn by playing. And there was a whole documentary from a small town in the Philippines, heavily hit by COVID. They all started playing this game and selling these rare items online for amounts that was basically monthly salaries. So if you think about what kind of money is floating around in the world, there's huge opportunities for people to tap into that. But also the fact that a company decides to sort of create stuff and create value around that, there's a flip in that. There's a flip in that whole idea. And the flip is a word I'd like to use when we talk about Web3 thinking. And a last example, back to more of the retail element, is the idea of digital marketing. I've been told that digital marketing or digital advertising banners is the second most criminal industry in the world. I think before guns or drugs, the other way around, I'm not sure. Because there's so much fake clicks happening, it's a huge criminal industry. So basically what's happening is, again, it's a value chain where you as an advertiser, little Slovakia, if you buy an ad, you have no idea where it goes, who clicks on it, and in the end, we still don't manage to make the local websites survive or the local newspaper sites. So there's something wrong with it. So what projects like Brave and the Basic Attention Token are doing is they're trying to flip that model, where again you actually get paid for clicking on an ad, not by supplying privacy data. And they're trying to create network economies where they all work for one shared alignment goal. They want to align the objective, that is, make the digital advertising world more transparent, more trackable for all parties, not just for a Google or a Facebook or for the crime world. And how can we actually make that happen? Technically, it's working. The economics behind it are super difficult. We have no idea how to monetize or how to value these companies. But the idea that the licensing models or the margins, at some point they will be challenged, especially the idea of rent extraction. Uber sitting on all that data, and they have walled gardens around it because that's the core of their business. That might come under threat. If, and a big if, and I'm getting excited, but I have to point this out to you, if these Web3 thinkers manage to get more into mainstream adoption. It's going to be difficult. You know, the few people here that have Bitcoin, No, it's a nightmare, right? It doesn't work. It's useless from a user experience point of view. It's stress. So we always go, well, who will ever use these kind of Web3 kind of applications? And I always go, who is ever going to use this? The Facebook, right? A college campus social network. Who was ever going to use that? And still it worked. Because once it goes, and I think that's the same with blockchain and Web3, it might go exponentially. And this quote from Ray Amara, a futurist, I always bear in mind when I talk about these kind of technologies. And again, we're making a full loop from technology to sort of humanity and human interaction back to sort of the impact of technology. He said, in the short term, we always overestimate technology. I mean, I thought blockchain was going to change the world 3 years ago. And it will take another 30, if at all. But in the long run, we tend to underestimate the impact of technologies. Same with social media. Most of us underestimated the impact it might have. And I think blockchain is also one of those technologies that might have a potentially huge impact on the way we do business, the way we do retail. And that's why I think the level is high. There's a small chance it might happen, because it's very, very difficult. But if they get it right, big impact. So, my counter was still fine, great. So a couple of takeaways just to wrap it up. It's a lot, I threw a lot at you. I threw pornography at you, and I threw cooperative models at you. Pick out of it what you want. I'm still around the afternoon for questions, but I think we have time for questions in a minute as well, yeah? Maybe a few, okay. But I'll just wrap it up. When you hear blockchain, don't think about technology. Don't think about Bitcoin. Think about this Web3 way of thinking. Don't be hypnotized by the crypto rage. It's important and fun and part of it, but that's not why it was invented. Instead, try to think in more abstract concepts if you can, like scarcity, guaranteed scarcity, alignment, traceability, because the technology changes all the time, and these concepts, especially for non-technical people, are easier to work with. Easier to say, how can we use these concepts in our existing business? How can we start new businesses out of it? How can we change the relationship with our customers, with our producers, etc., etc.? This is easier. Blockchains will make it work, but these concepts are stronger. And especially if you're an existing company and you're somewhere in the middle of that value chain, just assume at some point you may not exist. And think of what your added value is. And innovate on those added values with these kind of concepts in mind. It might give you ideas. If you've got innovation labs or R&D labs, that might be interesting to start working on. I've done it with a few companies. It's not easy, but it actually gives you an angle on looking back from not what can we do with blockchain to actually there's these concepts around how can we implement them on our existing company or on our startup to make a better product or a better service. But the most important thing is, and that's why I was so pleased that Lucia and Juraj invited me over to talk about humanity and technology, because it is actually a human technology. Blockchain is actually social design technology. There is an angle in there of game theory. How can you make people do certain things that's better for the community and not just for an individual thing? And that's a big thing. The problem is, they're all fucking techies. And we can't let them design the things for us. It's people like us, and sorry for the techies, I love techies, but it's also anyone, politicians, user UX designers. We all have to get involved in ripping these things apart, building them up. And there's only one way. Dive in, read more, invest if you want, but that's not the point. But feeling how this world is different from a Web 2 world is a really interesting way to explore what blockchain could very, 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 very maybe, but potentially with huge impact mean for retail and commerce. Thank you very much. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer. Thanks. Are there any questions? Either in the app or just on the microphone, if we have time.
Ja, I think we have still time. Tak nejaké otázky cez aplikáciu, alebo takto napriamo?
Oh, the lights are going on as well. Now it's really scary. Yes. I personally, for instance, the Nevermind is a company I work with. There I do more like strategic work than value proposition. I rarely am involved in the product design phase, especially not for startups because they're too clever. But there the problem is they can't explain it. They can't explain how interesting it could be to start sharing data between two parties who don't trust each other. So I help them almost sell the story and sell the use cases that you could come out of it. But I'm not technical, I can't program. I can do really good workshops, that I can. But that's sort of all I can, really. But a lot of these cases that I've shown are real. They work, but either in MVP modus or like first version and don't have much uptake yet. But it's growing. A browser like Brave has, I don't know, 20 million downloads or something now. It's working. It does automatic payouts for where you browse and all that. So it works. It's functioning. I actually got a payment this morning because I clicked on some ads. Poof, some crypto in my wallet. It's worth nothing, but it works.
So is there some database of the data, like those kind of like ways where people
See the apps, you mean? There used to be a registry of dApps, but I haven't checked it for a long time. I'm not sure. You connected, right? I'll see if I can find something. Also, the blockchains are very different now. There's the Bitcoin blockchain, which doesn't do much. It's very good at one thing. It's keeping track of who owns Bitcoin. But apart from that, you can't do anything. Then there's blockchains like Ethereum, where you can start building these applications on. But there's newer blockchains like Solana and Avalanche, and the ecosystem is growing massively. Another question? Totally confused? Sorry. Should have stuck to the car. Should have just sat and watched the flying car. All right? Cool. Thank you very much. Oh, at the back.
One more.
You can? You can ask me later. But even if you write me, I'll try and answer, yeah, of course. Yeah, you got my contact details. No, you'll find me. If you Google my name, you'll find me. There's also one other guy in Holland. I'm from Belgium, but there's a guy in Holland, but it's exactly the same name, and he's a comedian. So don't send him a message. Cool. All right. Again, thanks very much, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Gerrie.